Thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing today? What a beautiful morning we have here. And I want to welcome you all to our inaugural Always On Technology Symposium and welcome you back. This is a little bit of a homecoming of sorts, coming back to Gillette Stadium, the home of the Super Bowl champion New England Patriots. How many of you, show of hands, there'll be a few show of hands, you might have tired shoulders by the end of the day today. How many of you were at one of the first two Always On Symposiums right here at Gillette Stadium, where it all started? A good number of you. So this is really a homecoming of sorts in starting something new, the Always On Technology Symposium, in coming back to this fine venue. And being here to open up the day, one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about was last night I had a great dinner conversation with a couple of customers. And we were talking about how transformation and innovation in business today and how quickly and how much business and organizations and industries are evolving is very much rooted in technology today. So it stands to reason that we as technology leaders, technology decision makers, should be at the forefront of that and should be in more control and driving a lot of the innovation that should be happening in our businesses. Sure, we deal with innovation in technology itself, but the technology is not there for its own sake. It's really there to accelerate and differentiate and enable the business, isn't it? So the theme that we chose for the day today was influence. And what I like to share with you, when I talk about the fact that if we should be out in front and leading and driving and controlling this innovation, this transformation, because we are the technologists, do we have control over the business itself? Does the business report to us? Do we have a command and control kind of a relationship with the business? No, we don't, do we? What we have to do is find a way to compel the business to embrace these opportunities and transform and leverage these technologies for innovation and be aware of what's happening out there. So this notion of influence, if I give you a definition of influence to start, is it's really the power to change or affect someone without actually controlling or forcing them to do it, right? It sounds like an awfully nice position to be in. Would you all agree with that? Where I can actually influence people or compel people to want to change and adapt and adopt these technologies and move forward with us. That's how we can have and make a significant impact from the technology suite, if you will. Now, in opening up the day, I'd like to take a little bit of a walk back in history. I happen to be a huge history fan. Any history fans in the audience? We have a tendency to be. I'm a big fan of history, and in large part, but for the same reason that my high school history teacher told me. And that is that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it, right? So this is what we should always be looking back and learning from history so that we're in a better position moving forward. I'd like to explore a little bit of history with you this morning just to kind of get started and set some context for the day. How many of you remember that sound? A number of you probably have it ringing on your cell phones today even. It's kind of a little bit of nostalgia there. But can we all remember, many of us can remember these phones in our homes, can't we? We had two choices. Lots of choice for what we could have in our homes for phones at that point. We had desktop or we had wall mount. That was it. That was the selection that we had available to us at the time. And eventually it moved to touch tone, same thing, desktop and wall mount. And then things got really crazy when the phone company said, you know what, we're going to be really efficient, and we're not going to manufacture two different models of phones. We're going to come out with this new slimline phone. The slimline phone was a wall mount phone and a desktop phone. It was the same phone. You just chose whether you wanted to mount it on the wall or not, right? More choice just kind of taken away from us. But why was that the case? Why was it that we didn't have much choice back then? Think about the services that we had or didn't have back then. Also, what did we have? We had dial tone and long distance. Right? That was pretty much all that you got from the phone company at that time, right? We were okay with it. Why were we okay with it? We had no control, no choice, no options. Because we were influenced by, a little feedback there, influenced by a monopoly, right? AT&T had a stranglehold on telephone services, telecom services within our country. Same thing was happening over in Europe, with other entities, but that's kind of how the telecom industry grew up. It was necessary in order to get all the infrastructure in place that was going to be needed in order for telecom to be so far-reaching. But essentially, we in the US, we had no other place to go. You went to AT&T, that's where you get your telephone service from. But then the government steps in and says, no more monopoly. We're going to deregulate. Some people call it liberalization rather than deregulation. I'm gonna stick with deregulation for the moment. The government came in and said, no longer will AT&T have a stranglehold, a monopoly hold on telecom. It was broken up into the regional bell operating companies, remember the baby bells? And that's where you get your local service from. And we saw a lot of things happen at that time, right? So we had all these, the baby bells were kind of nipping at the heels of the big, the big behemoth, AT&T. We saw some other long-distance companies popping up as well, the MCIs and the Sprints, and we got competition. Isn't competition a great thing? Isn't that how we evolve and we move forward? It really stimulates innovation and inspires new ways of thinking and going after things in order to maintain and grow market share. And what happened was we get decreases in price, right? I could still remember those commercials where it was AT&T coming on 1 minute, saying long distance at 4 cents a minute, and then the next commercial break, it was MCI saying, we have long distance at 3.5 cents per minute, right? It was really competitive for pricing back then. So competition naturally drives prices down. Everybody agree with that? But competition also stimulates innovation. We get a lot more services at that point when you had all these different companies competing with one another for your dollars, for your telecom dollars. So we get services like call waiting. That was one of the coolest first services that we got, right? When in '84, when the baby bells were basically born, we got caller ID. So now we could do that call screen. A lot of that's the screening the calls thing going on, right? Voicemail service was offered by the telephone companies as well. One of the other things that was kind of neat that happened was when that deregulation happened and the baby bells were born, the government told the baby bells, the regional bell operating companies, that you cannot manufacture and own the terminal equipment. So it wasn't going to be that there were two choices of phone like AT&T gave you, but instead they were going to open this up to competition, and other industries would benefit, like consumer electronics manufacturers. Now we get all sorts of cool new phones that we could leverage. We got answering machines. We got wireless phones. Everybody remember the 900 megahertz wireless phones that as soon as the microwave went off, nothing ever worked, and you couldn't talk to anybody. But all these great things were born from the deregulation, the breakup of that monopoly, and the creation of all of this competition. Where would we be today if the AT&T monopoly hadn't been broken up? We'd still be choosing the same phones and maybe even using rotary dial. And this, by the way, was just the beginning. This is about 1984 when this happened, because then the floodgates were just busted open. And in 1996, Bill Clinton signed the Telecom Deregulation Act of 1996, which basically said any and all communications industries can and should be competing in each other's spaces. So it wasn't that you had your broadcast folks over here, television, telecom or telephony, internet service providers, all in separate industries that were shielded from one another. Instead, we were encouraging them all to compete with one another in their spaces. And the purpose here was to hyper-accelerate innovation. Competition naturally does that, doesn't it? So the phone, cable, internet, those companies all were competing and were not restricted to just being within their respective industries. Now, what happened there? We have the Verizons, Cox, Comcast. Do they really look different from one another? Cox calls me, and I'll sign a contract with them for 2 years. And then when the 2-year contract comes up, they just let the prices go up, and so they don't call me and say, hey, by the way, you might want to renew at a lower rate. We all know how that works, right? Instead, Verizon knocks on the door with Fios, and I get essentially the same services, and they'll give me a cheaper rate, and I just ping pong back and forth every 2 years because they're all sort of the same, and they're just constantly leapfrogging one another. And now we see that they're not just offering internet and phone and television, they're doing home automation and security in your home and those types of things, right? They're pushing the envelope and competing with one another. This competition is a great thing. So why all this monopoly talk, do you think? Well, because we have a lesson to learn from history. You see, I believe that for the last 30 years, we as technologists have had a monopoly stranglehold over the business for technology, for business enabling technology. The business doesn't know how to work with and use technology. We had these unique skill sets. We kind of sat in our data centers, in our fish bowls, if you will, and the business had to come to us. However, and not by the government's choice, this wasn't the FCC stepping in or anything and saying that we're no longer going to have this. We're actually experiencing a bit of a liberalization or a deregulation as well. We are now in a position where we literally have to compete, almost like we're our own businesses, our own industry. Within our organizations, we have to compete for our customers, for the mind share and market share of our users, our line of business peers. Today we have third parties who directly go to your line of business peers, say the Salesforce.com goes to a vice president of sales or marketing and is selling in a very value-centered business way, and they're selling ease, aren't they? This will be really easy for you to implement, and I'm very much talking in business terms. We also have to deal with our employees at home, having access to technology that in many ways, it's less expensive and it's better than the technologies that we can provide at the office. Crazy, isn't it? Doesn't the business have all this money? Shouldn't we be able to be the ones leading, on the leading edge with the technology rather than somebody just coming in from home with something, cool and new? To a great extent, we're losing mind share and market share with our customers, our business users, our line of business peers in the executive suite sometimes. We have to find a way to deal with that. We have to find a way to compete in this rapidly evolving market. Deregulation is forcing that, whether we like it or not. We're in this competitive situation, and like any other business, let's put on our CEO hat, and let's pretend that the IT department, IS, is actually its own business. If a CEO is losing market share, losing mind share to somebody else, he or she is going to come up with a competitive strategy, aren't they? And I believe that what we need is a demand generation strategy. We all have plenty of extra time in our hands, right? Everybody's sitting around. We can generate more demand for services, right? Everybody's sitting around. There's plenty of time for people to do extra things if we stimulate more demand, right? I don't think that's the case. However, if we don't do this, more is going to be taken away from us, and we will find ourselves with excess time on our hands. And I would also say that if we generate more demand, we stimulate more interest from the business to do new and different things, and we're out in front leading that, budget comes with it. More revenue essentially comes into our business, the IT department, in the form of budget. But we have to compete and come up with a strategy for generate that demand. In order to do that, we're going to have to, as IT decision makers, IT employees, we're going to have to embrace new skill sets. So let's take a look at some of the skill sets that you traditionally find in IT leaders. Technology, leadership, finance, business. This is just a handful of them. There are many, many more. Wait a second. Does that say sales skills? Really? Because let's face it, most of us actually chose IT careers so that we wouldn't have to sell, right? That's just not in our nature. We're not comfortable really with selling. We're kind of like this guy, aren't we? I love the look on John Cusack's face when he first says kickboxing. And I can imagine, a number of us in the early days of IT when we told somebody that that's what we were getting into, kind of sitting there saying, is it okay? This is a new kind of space. Is it okay for me to do that? And the father being there confused, I have no idea what you're talking about. I can't believe you're choosing that kind of a career. But seriously, I'm not trying to turn you all into salespeople. I'm not going to talk about selling all day long. I could, by the way, and I'd be happy to debate with any or all of you all day long about how important the function of selling is in our society. One may argue it's the most important function in society in general. Clearly, it's represented by the fact that we value salespeople so highly in business. But instead, what I'd like to do is to explore a different definition of selling. One more like this: explaining the logic and benefits of a decision. Kind of makes sense, right? No dollars exchanging hands, and not a hard pressure, a steak knife salesman coming to your door, a vacuum salesman, or convincing others that an idea makes sense. Now, that idea or that decision could be to invest money in a solution, or it could be to adopt a new technology or a new way of doing things, right? It's about convincing one as opposed to forcing them to comply with the idea of doing or taking action on something. In essence, isn't sales really influence? If we take the definition that we talked about in the beginning of influence, and we marry it to the definition that I just shared with you, isn't that really what selling is influencing somebody to make a decision or to see the value in something? The reality is that you're all probably sitting there wondering, why am I talking about all of this sales stuff? And the reason for that is that if we want to drive more demand to our department for our services and to even create more services, we're going to have to increase our level of influence. That's why we chose the theme for the day. We're going to need to sell. But how do we do that? Now, I'm not suggesting that we become that vacuum cleaner salesperson, or we, just get a part-time job on the weekend selling cars, and maybe that would, teach us how to do that. I am suggesting that we need to market to our customers and then help them to understand what the benefit would be of making certain decisions. That is selling, as I mentioned. The more successful we are at selling and then delivering on that value, the more influence we're going to wield within the business. Now, there are several, many, many different ways that we could teach you, or you can be taught how to develop, how to sell and how to develop sales skills. There are lots of models out there. The Sandler sales model, there's spin selling, Carnegie, there's all sorts of different ones. I stumbled across this one. I happened to find this one to be very interesting in this particular context. It's a book called The Challenger Sale by Matt Dixon and Brian Adamson. And it basically sums things up and says that good salespeople today, and we all know good salespeople, they establish great relationships with their customers, and then they facilitate and make the transaction easy. They take all the red tape, as much of the red tape out of the way as they possibly can. And they have their customers' best interest in heart, but that's what it is about, relationship and transaction. But that great salespeople, challenger salespeople, are the ones that are going to their customers and challenging them, trying to influence them to look at things in a different way. And they sum it up into three, I call it 3 T's. It's three simple things. The first T is to teach, and that is, teach customers, your users, your business peers in the boardroom or the executive suite, teach them what the possibilities are, what's going on out there in the world. The second is to tailor. So take those possibilities, understand where our business is looking to go, what we're trying to accomplish, and see where the marriage might be between those two. How can I help you to accomplish your goals by tailoring taking this possibility and bringing it to bear? And then finally, taking control and making it easy and driving this all to conclusion. Now, one of the things that I find really interesting about this is, remember I mentioned that we're in a state of competition. Somebody's trying to steal our customers. We need to think and act like we're our own business. If you look at a basic business life cycle, basically when I'm conducting business and bringing in revenue, there are 3 things that I do. I market, and that's what I'm saying we do when we teach. When we teach, we're marketing and creating awareness. When I tailor, I'm selling and custom tuning that particular solution to help the customer to make that decision and see the value in it. And then taking control is just like delivering. So I market, I sell, and I deliver. That's essentially what we do in a business. This particular model is not unlike that. This is how we start to act more like a business, within our organizations. We are very fortunate, all of us sitting here in the careers that we're in today, in that we actually are in a perfect position to take advantage of this type of a model. We are particularly good at 3 great things. One is we have this natural exposure to and passion for technology. Would everybody agree with that? What are we here to talk about today? We're here to talk about technology. We're great at doing that, so we can teach about the technology. We happen to have the best visibility cross-organization, even more so than finance. Sure, finance sees every dollar go everywhere, but we see every process, every interaction. We have the best visibility within our businesses, more so than anybody else does. So we're in a perfect position to tailor these technologies to fit into our businesses. And then finally, with the exception of the construction industry maybe, nobody is more astute at project management than we are. So we're naturally predisposed to being good at this notion of teach, tailor, and take control. But where and how do we begin? Well, let's start right at the beginning. And that is that we should be teaching about technology. The whole reason that we're here today, to help you to raise your level of influence by teaching about the technology to your business. So show of hands, I'm really interested to see what this is going to look like. How many of you proactively get in front of the board or your executive team or your leadership peers and teach them about trends and possibilities that are happening out there in the industry, just to inform them and make them aware of it? Show of hands. Probably 5%, less than 5% of the group. I have to tell you that I've asked that question to a number of CIO groups in the last couple of months, and I'm actually shocked at the number of hands that don't go up. And it's not because they don't want to. It's kind of like, how do I, usually the business wants me to come with instant value. They're not really interested in me stepping up and preaching about what's happening out there. However, that's not what we want to do, is enable the business to think about the possibilities, and they can't do that if they don't know what those possibilities are. We have to set the stage for that and find ways to make that happen. That's what we're here to do today. So to give some examples all day long of how we can take trends that are happening out there in the industry and bring them to the business and teach them. So let's start at perhaps the broadest, the highest, the most macro technology level that we can right now. Let's start with megatrends. We've all heard this term before. You may recall at AOS 2012, right here at Gillette Stadium, I talked about megatrends. And these trends are mega because they're changing the world in which we live and the way that we interact with it and with each other. In many ways, I would say that they're changing the human species, these trends. They're going to impact our business whether we like it or not, whether we embrace it and use them and do something with them, or we learn about them and find out about how powerful they can be by competing with somebody else who has. So let's start with let's look at all four of them. They look familiar, don't they? We've seen these, IDC calls these, they talk about them in their third platform assertion. Gartner talks about these megatrends as the nexus of forces. I'm not declaring anything as a megatrend that you haven't already heard somebody else, maybe even me, call a megatrend in the past. I do, however, want to talk about why they're mega, because this is what we want to help our businesses, our organizations to understand. These things are happening. You need to be aware of it, Mr. CEO, sales peer, whatever that is. And we want to find out different ways to teach the business about them, basically to market and create awareness about this. Let's start with the social megatrend. Now, when I think about this megatrend, and even how it's evolved over the last few years, since I talked about it at AOS 2012, I am blown away, truly blown away at the magnitude at which this trend has actually affected the world. Let's take a look at this video, which will set some context to it, some perspective. I hope we find a way to extend your attention span longer than a goldfish's today. That's the goal. It's funny, I had read an article recently that said that it takes 30 tweets for you to get a call from a congressman. How many letters did you have to send years ago in order to get the attention of somebody, on Capitol Hill? That's how powerful and how fast this, and how viral this all becomes. It's really incredible. So it's become so pervasive, but that really makes sense, doesn't it? We're a social species. So it's natural that new and expanded ways of interacting with and sharing would impact us and would be embraced. Now, you may recall back in 2012 that I coined the term, I said, if necessity is the mother of invention, then I submit to you that sharing is the grandfather of progress. That's how we progress as a species, is somebody else shares their experience and their knowledge with us, and then rather than having to experience it ourselves, we build on top of that, right? It's incredible how much progress we've made just in these last 3 years since I made that statement. In fact, many people today would suggest that we've now entered a new economic age. We had, I was reading a Wired magazine article the other day that was recommended to me by a friend, and the article said that we've moved from the industrial age, the industrial economy, to the digital or the knowledge age, or knowledge economy, and that now we've moved to the sharing economy. Really interesting that we're defining a whole age that way now. We'll share just about anything, won't we? It's crazy the things that we share. Some of us share a little bit too much. You know who you are out there. But seriously, we share things using things like Zipcar and Uber and GigWalk and Airbnb. We'll share some of the most personally identifying possessions that we have and allow others to market, sell, consume, and monetize those. And by doing so, we're actually growing the economy in ways that few could have predicted, aren't we? My friend Miguel Ray, sitting up here in the front, shared a really great story with me the other day. He has a friend who has an office space in a trendy area of Florida, expensive real estate. And rather than just leasing out that space en masse, they're using it as a co-working space. So it can seat 250 people, and they lease the space to $100 per month per person. So you, as an individual, can have office space that you can go to for $100 per month. When you do all the math, it nets out at $300,000 a year of rental income that's coming in. Six times what the market value would have been if they had just leased it in the traditional way. All because we're slicing and dicing and taking advantage of the most minute pieces that may or may not be used of any objects or entities. Really incredible. We're sharing cars. We're sharing workspace. We're sharing workforces. And we're even sharing our homes. I think it's insane. That whole, one of the logos that's up here, LEXC, I think is really cool. That whole co-working space, that's the League of Extraordinary Co-working Spaces. So I shared with you one that Miguel exposed me to that is in Florida. They are a member of the league. You can go all across the country. So $100 a month per person. I go to California. I need office space for a week while I'm there. I have to find one of these spaces. That's cool. We're finding ways to get the absolute most out of every asset by sharing. The thing we need to do for our businesses, this is what I'm talking about when teaching about the possibilities, we need to help our businesses understand that this is happening and help them explore ways in which their business models might change. But many of them just have no concept that theirs could change in such a way. Look at how the transportation industry has been revolutionized by Uber. So let's talk about megatrend number 2, mobile. We talked about it previously. I talked about how mobile was about being connected and not feeling uneasy when you're disconnected from people. And that's still true. In fact, I recently purchased a new mobile phone, and my first priority for consideration for the mobile phone was battery life. I cannot stand when the battery, even at the end of the day, if it's getting down to 20%, I'm nervous. Am I going to make it through the rest of the day and not be connected? And while that's all still true, the definition has broadened from just being connected to and the mobile devices making us mobile to instead being more us-centered and making it so that our lives are what's mobile. Whether they're our personal lives or our professional lives, these devices, and it's not just the phones, it's laptops, it's tablets, are what make our lives with us all the time. I kind of like to call it the pro-personal lives. You might hear that term a little bit today. There's no line anymore between professional and personal. We fully expect to be able to interface, even in micro moments, with both sides of our lives, or the pro-personal life. Shouldn't we be helping our businesses to understand this? I mean, it's not just about how our employees work. That's important to help our businesses to understand. But perhaps more importantly, with respect to understanding our organization's target market and customers. If our total addressable market as a business could be expanded exponentially by squeezing into those micro moments of people's pro-personal lives, isn't that worth pursuing? Shouldn't we be influencing the business to explore those types of things? And by the way, more and more content is being consumed. In fact, more content is being consumed on mobile devices today via mobile broadband than by traditional broadband. So it stands to reason that we need to have a strategy for reaching and engaging in a way that inserts us into people's lives as opposed to them coming to us. 225 billion, that's a billion with a B, mobile apps will be downloaded next year. That's just crazy. In fact, however, that's what makes us as individuals nodes on this Internet of Things that we hear more and more about. It's not just about inanimate devices and probes. We become nodes on that Internet of everything. Our target markets share tremendous amounts of potential digital value with us using these mobile means and by becoming nodes on this Internet of Things. Our businesses need to understand and embrace that. Now, let's move to number 3. We talk about cloud, which you'll hear a lot about today. I want to focus on one primary thing that I think we should be teaching our businesses about. And it's not about where is your data, that's important, but it's more about the fact that due to cloud, and TiVo, we as human beings, especially as consumers, really don't care where anything is located anymore. All we care about is when I want to access it and interface with it, wherever it happens to be, I should be able to gain access to it. In fact, the internet and cloud and mobile have expanded our reach across the globe and beyond, and set our expectations that our body of knowledge, our experience that we build on and progress from, is not something we need to memorize or write down or go to a library or read a book in order to gain access to. It's just there, somewhere, reachable anytime, anywhere, on any type of device. That's all that matters to us as human beings today. It's not unlike memory or something we've experienced. Can anybody tell me where in their brain last night's dinner was stored, that experience? No, but you can retrieve the memory of that dinner easily enough. That's all that matters, is that I can get at it when I need to. So it stands to reason that our target markets, for our businesses, they will continue to expect more and more ease by which we engage with them, more convenience. They don't care where it happens or how it happens, they just expect this. The ways that we interact and find ways to fit into those pro-personal lives, that's what has to happen as opposed to the other way around where they're coming to us. We should be teaching our business peers about this. Do you agree? Somebody has to be bringing this to them, and we want it to be us, not a third party. This will help them to find opportunities to exploit these trends before our competitors do. Now, one of the other things I think is really cool is, by the way, who our businesses compete with has actually changed significantly due to cloud and mobile. I kind of like to take cloud and mobile and put them together, and I look at them together as like a mega trend, or what I like to call them the great equalizer. When they come together, even a little company of one person, a David, if you will, in an underdeveloped or developing country, can gain access to the global economy and the same tools like Salesforce or Office 365 we'll hear about later, same tools that previously only Goliath or the entitled or privileged could have access to. Mobile and cloud have made that all possible. Our businesses need to be keenly aware of who our competitors might be that they may not have foreseen due to this enablement. Let's talk about the last megatrend, data. We hear the term constantly: big data, data in motion, data visualization, data analytics, data at rest, data storage, data security, data leakage, so on and so on. And that's all important stuff. But what I think is important about data, and I want to stress here, and I think you need to stress to your organizations, is that data represents potential. Everything around us has data potential that may have some type of value to you or to somebody else now or in the future, but not if we don't conceive of it. People, places, behaviors, objects, all have that potential when we digitize them, right? You'll hear the term digitization a little bit today as well. But even though there's all this tremendous potential, that all comes down to perspective. You know, we use data to measure performance, predict performance, hypothesize, prove a hypothesis perhaps. And in many ways, the data that we capture may have no apparent value to us today, but tremendous value in the future to you, or maybe it's somebody else. Speaking of data terms, anybody heard of this one? Show of hands. Anybody heard of data exhaust? I know Susan has. Susan's heard me talk about it before. A couple of years ago, I was researching for a presentation, and I stumbled across this. Very interesting term. So let me share with you what the definition is. The unstructured data or information that is a byproduct of online activities of internet users. So why is that important? It's interesting that Google created a spell checking application for a fraction of the cost that Microsoft did. So Microsoft spent 20 years and millions of dollars developing a spell checker for Word from the ground up. Consider, what are the possible misspellings and all the things that you have to create and identify. Yet Google instead took all of the misspellings that happen in the 3 billion interactions or queries that happen per day and kept track of those and how people corrected their misspellings and had a sound data set for building a word, a spell checker at a fraction of the cost. But this was all byproduct information that was just sitting there, apparently with no real value. It all comes down to perspective, right? We need to work with our businesses to understand the potential value of the data we already capture. Did you guys know that Nike is an information company? We all know them as a sportswear company, sports apparel, performance kind of company. But they make wearables like the Nike Fuel Band, tracking people's exercise activities and their running routes. Do you think that Gatorade as a company would be an interested customer of Nike's if they could find out from Nike where all the running routes in Manhattan are and at what corners do people get stuck at stoplights or at intersections? Do you think Gatorade would find that to be valuable information? They sure would. Nike is actually an information company, but not something they set out to do in the first place. The information they gathered was actually to be used by the wearer, and now they find ways to compound that value. It's tremendous. We have to think that way, though. And we need to work with our organizations to constantly be challenging ourselves to determine what data should we capture. That's the big question. We can't just capture it all. Where would we put it all? Who would own it? How would we store it? But data is like the wind in that there's tremendous potential energy, potential value in the wind as it passes by. But once the breeze is going by, can I race to catch up with the wind and capture that value? It's already gone. It's the same thing with data. If I haven't captured it, even if I don't know how I'm going to use it or what value it's going to bring to me, if I don't have it now, it's only when I conceive of an idea that I can start collecting it, and then I'm behind in the game. So, what's happening in the world around us, impacted by all of these megatrends, is nothing short of mind-blowing, in my opinion. And our organizations need to know this. If we aren't teaching them, however, they're bound to learn about it somewhere, aren't they? Maybe it's at home, from a friend, from a colleague at a conference. How many have had that happen? CEO comes back from a conference, has lots of great ideas about the cloud that now become your problem. Maybe it's from that third-party provider who sells directly to the line of business. Worse yet, maybe it's from a competitor when you find yourself at a competitive disadvantage, right? I don't know about you, but I prefer to be the one bringing these things to the business. I believe that we are all better served if we are the influencers, teaching, tailoring, and taking control of our organization's futures. Technology is how our organizations are transforming. We need to be the ones out in front making that happen. Let's use today as a springboard for making that happen in all of our organizations. Thank you.